Buenas and half a day. The Committee on Environment, Revenue, Taxation, and Procurement is now called to order. The time is now 9:05 a.m. It's June 12, 2019. The notice of this morning's public hearing or informational hearing was provided to senators, stakeholders, and local media on June 5, 2019, meeting the 5-day notice, and on June 10, 2019, meeting the 48-hour notice, thus meeting the requirements of open government law. The purpose of this informational hearing is to discuss several things regarding the Department of Revenue and Taxation. Item 1 is collection plan and efforts. Item 2 is enforcement of bed and breakfast and short-term rentals. Item 3 is pending rules and regulations. Item 4 is technology needs and updates. Item 5 is human resources status and needs. The next item is insurance licenses updates. The next item is impact of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, otherwise known as the Trump tax cut. The next item is the military buildup associated revenues. And the last item is technical research and appeals branch, or TRAP, process and purposes. The committee will continue to receive testimony until 4 p.m. on Monday, June 17, 2019. Please address testimony to myself, Senator Sabina Perez, Chairperson of the Committee on Environment, Revenue, Taxation, and Procurement. It could be dropped at the mailboxes here at the legislature, or it could be emailed to me at office@senatorperez.org. So now to begin our agenda, we would like to start off with a PowerPoint presentation that introduces some of the hard work that Department of Revenue and Taxation is doing on behalf of our island, and to update us on some of the collections that have taken place thus far in this year. So I would like to turn over the mic to Director Daphne Shimizu. And first of all, I just want to thank the department for being here. So Director Daphne Shimizu, Deputy Director Michelle Santos, and
Deputy Tax Commissioner
Paul Pablo, and everybody else supporting her today. So I would like to go ahead with the first item as far as the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you, Senator. So we did put together a brief PowerPoint presentation trying to address some of the items which were listed on the agenda, but also sharing a bit about our agency, what we do, and who we are. And so if you'll turn to the next slide. So we wanted to share with you what our mission is. Our mission is to provide quality service to our island community by helping our people to understand and meet tax and licensing responsibilities, encouraging voluntary compliance, and enhancing public confidence in our service systems through the application of laws, policies, rules, and regulations with integrity and fairness to all. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. So we wanted to go through and just list out our branches and our divisions. Under the administration division, we have our director's office, our chief of administration office, our office support staff for the director's office, the passport issuance and acceptance department or division, and also we have TRAB. If we move to the next slide, we have also our tax enforcement division, our taxpayer services division, our real property tax divisions, motor vehicles, and regulatory. And this just basically lists out again all of our branches within those divisions. If we go to the next slide, so these next slides, they provide information on what the functions of our different branches are. So for our tax enforcement division, we have the collections branch, the examination branch, and the criminal investigation branch. And the functions are listed there for your reference. And if we go to the next slide, under the taxpayer services division, we have our income tax assistance and processing branch, our business privilege tax branch, electronic data processing, accounting, and central files. And we can move to the next branch, our real property tax division. We have the real property tax appraisal branch and the real property tax assessment branch. And in the next slide, you'll see our motor vehicle division, which encompasses motor carrier, vehicle registration, and driver's license. And our next slide, our regulatory divisions, which are our general licensing and registration, compliance, weights and measures, insurance, securities, banking, and real estate. And Next slide, please. So listed on the agenda for this informational hearing, the first item was our collection plan and efforts. And so this slide, we wanted to share with you, Senator, I guess a summary of our collection plan and efforts. The first bullet is our AR balance summary. And when we talk about referred accounts, we mean those accounts that actually have been referred to our collections branch for active collections. And as of April 30, what we had in terms of AR for these accounts was about 142 million. And as of May 31, it went down a little bit to about 140.5 million. And so we saw a little bit of movement in our AR over the last couple of months.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
So for the accounts receivable for April 30th compared to May 31st, so the difference is basically what has been collected in that month that have passed between April and May? Is that correct?
Right, and so how the AR would work, it would be the beginning balance plus anything that, any new accounts that have been referred minus any payments during that period will be the ending balance. So it already takes into consideration any new accounts that have been referred because we're continuously referring cases to collections.
Okay, so just for the purposes of the public, can you just explain what accounts receivable is and
Sure. Okay, so regarding accounts receivable, so these are basically what's sitting in the as due to the Department of Revenue and Taxation for taxes and other items that we that have been assessed. And so those amounts are again what's sitting in our AR or accounts receivable as what we have to collect. And this doesn't include, for example, of course, so there are basically three areas where we receive monies. The first is, of course, through the current account. So meaning you have an income tax return, you come in, you pay it, and then it's done. The second place that it would go if there is an error or some issue with your return, it would go to our accounting branch, our tax accounting branch, and that's the place where, okay, the first notices would go out if it's a local tax or if it's GTIT. I believe there's only one notice. So that's the first place that an individual would get a notice. The larger piece of our AR actually sits in our collections branch, and this is the third area, which is this. So once an account is actually considered not current and it's needing collection, then it gets referred to our collections branch, and that's what's sitting here in these balances.
so the AR is what's referred to collections, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and it doesn't include taxpayers that have paid their taxes in full?
Correct.
So what percentage is that of all the tax due? Is that of the, I guess, 140.5 million, what percent of that is the total revenue?
That I'll have to get back to you, but this is also, this is an accumulated balance, right? And so these are not necessarily just for this current tax year. These could be for prior tax years. So we'll have to get back to you on that.
Because I'm looking at the previous report that was given last year, and the AR, or accounts receivable, was at 161 million. So it shows a big improvement, it seems. It would seem that there's a huge improvement.
So if you're looking, and I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me, but I believe if you're looking at that those prior slides that were presented, you'll see there's a page where it shows 55 million, I'm sorry.
Right.
That 155 million is what is comparable to this 140 million. So as of September 30, I believe it was 155 million, which is what we call in category 3, which is collections branch, and that's where that is. So the majority of our receivables are really there.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be great if you can provide the breakdown as it appeared in the last report, just to get a better handle of what
All right,
what can we expect from, or what's the high risk and what's the one that is we're expecting a high return on the receivables.
Okay, and thank you, Senator, because we hadn't had the opportunity to update that full presentation as of now, but we'll work to get that information. Okay, so what you're asking for is just a breakdown like what you saw in that schedule?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do you attribute the increase in I guess, recovery of the receivables compared to last year of 155 million versus 140 million at this point?
So your question is why there was a reduction?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I can only speak for our efforts now, and in fact, we've only been really at Rev and Tax for the last 5 months, and I can speak on like what we've done, and what we've done in this year is, and I guess we can refer back to the presentation. We worked on under the second bullet, which is summary of collection plan and efforts. We worked on referring cases to the OAG, and for injunction, and that's something which is relatively new, and because, in fact, we've worked to develop processes for this because there were not established processes for this particular initiative, and so we worked to do that. We actually referred some cases in March, which resulted in some complaints being filed with the local courts, which were in the paper, and then also now we're preparing to send some more cases to the OAG. But we've actually taken on, a bit of a campaign in terms of, every single time that I have the opportunity, I let people know that, one, we're grateful for everybody who's come in, and that we really do want to do our best to work with taxpayers to help them to get into compliance. And so, so I believe that, we're beginning to see some movement because of that as well. But also, we've actually ramped up our field service visits. So we've always had field visits, meaning that we have revenue officers who go out and they go visit taxpayers to collect on outstanding taxes. But we've actually ramped that up. I believe in the second week that we were at Rev and Tax in this January, our collections supervisor took it upon herself when we advised that our number one item that we have to work on is collections. She took it upon herself to get our team out, and our team is out, I believe, 3 to 4 times a week now, and they're out, pounding the pavement and trying to get taxpayers to pay. And because of that, I mean, if you look at the third bullet under cash collection projections program, basically what this is we were able to, in this past month, this is basically a summary of the promises to pay, meaning as we've contacted taxpayers, if you look at PTP means promise to pay, and it has 544,983. So what that is it's, our contacting taxpayers, requesting for them to, come in and make payment, and they made promises to pay. And what we've collected was actually more than how much people had promised to pay. So I think that's a positive thing that's happened that's resulted from our collections team, ramping up their efforts to communicating with our taxpayers. Above that, though, in terms of plans, we have the 2019 annual notices program. This is something that's required on an annual basis. We do send out notices to our taxpayers to remind them of the amounts of taxes, both local tax and GTIT, that's due to Rev and Tax. And as I understand it, historically, this has really motivated people to come in and pay their taxes. So after we mail these notices out in July, on or around July 15, then we are expecting that we're going to have people come in to make those payments.
So who are these annual notices sent to?
The annual notices are sent to taxpayers who have an outstanding tax liability. So those people who are have outstanding receivables with us or who owe us money, or who owe Rev and Tax money, will get notices. So
that's great. So what is the difference compared to last year as far as these promise to pay? Do you have a number for that?
No,
as far as the differences?
We'll work on that. I'm sorry. We were trying to gather some information to get to you, so we don't have some comparable data, but we'll get comparable data to you.
So according to the executive budget, we have an increase of 19 million versus last year. So I'm looking at the numbers here. compared, so the AR balance summary is 15 million, seems like it's 15 million over from last year. And then you're in talking about the efforts, the increased efforts that Department of Revenue and Taxation is doing in regarding referrals to the Office of the Attorney General, as well as to doing more outreach or pounding the pavement. How it seems like there's something that's not adding up as far as the 19 million versus what I'm seeing for what's listed here. What do you attribute to the increases in collections?
The increases in our collections?
Yeah, so the 19 million that's in the executive budget, how is that determined?
Well, I mean, what we do is, our focus is really on collections. And in terms of, again, determining exactly the impact of our efforts, it's a little bit difficult to say without really looking at more data, I suppose. But we believe that, there are, and again, this is really kind of more anecdotal, right? It's really, the way we feel is because, based on discussions with our collections team, that we're really seeing more taxpayers come in. Now, how much we can attribute that to just our efforts versus, there are also changes because of Tax Cuts Jobs and other things. That's difficult to say because we're still kind of early in this tax filing period. What we wanted to share was that our collections process is continuous, and our team is actually continuously looking at different ways that we can work to increase our collections. And some other items that we have is we actually, and these are continuous items that we do. There is a federal contract compliance program, and what this means is that we actually have collections people that are dedicated to monitoring our base contractors, or those contractors that have been awarded contracts with our bases. So they utilize usaspending.gov, and they also coordinate and communicate with people at NAVFAC so that we can make sure that we know who the contractors are, and that on our end and the tax side, we actually make sure that we monitor that they are filing their withholdings and filing and paying withholdings, and that they're filing taxes. So that's something large because we know that we do get a significant amount of revenues from that particular industry. And we also, in our TRAB section and our criminal investigation branch section, we also refer cases for criminal prosecution. And I think all of those combined efforts are really helpful in terms of letting people know that we're really serious about collecting. And so, those are the efforts that we're undertaking. But in terms of, trying to identify the executive budget, the increase, I mean, again, it's a little difficult to say. We're happy to see that we're seeing an increase, though, in our collections in the general fund. But again, that's not something that, that's not our area of expertise, perhaps.
So going back to the contractors that have contracts with the bases, so we're getting revenues through licenses, withholding taxes. What other means? Are there other means that we're collecting?
Yes, so through GRT, so anybody that does business on Guam, they have to file their, the same taxes that all other operations that do business on Guam. Mm-hmm. They have to pay income taxes. Of course, there are different tax situations based on, their structure and where they're located, but they'll pay income tax, they'll pay GRT, they'll pay withholding. Mm-hmm. So those all come to Guam, mm-hmm. And those are things that we monitor.
Can you explain the federal contract compliance program?
Yes, so basically, like I mentioned earlier, we actually have a few people in our collections group, and they actively monitor, they're assigned to monitor the base contractors, the list of base contractors. They utilize usaspending.gov because you can actually, on that website, search for the the contractors that have location in Guam, or that are located in Guam, or that have contracts with the location Guam. And we do coordinate and meet with NAVFAC, and based on the list and based on the information that we get, we monitor those companies. As I understand it, and we don't have the numbers for the current fiscal year, but in fiscal year 2017, we showed that we collected approximately $34 million from those base contractors.
Okay.
And then we also conduct industry audits. Industry audits are they're audits of a particular industry. Sometimes we audit based on we may get a letter, or someone may come into our office and because they have information regarding a certain industry, so we may look at those. It's been a few years since we really did some significant industry audits, but we're hoping that in the next fiscal year, if we have additional funding and other things, that we'll be able to ramp up those efforts.
Sorry, if I can interject, I just want to recognize my colleague, Senator Therese Terlahi, and thank you for joining me here today. Do you have any questions at this time? Okay. All right, so going back to the $19 million, so can you say how much of that was attributed to companies that have been publicized in the news as of late? How much of that is attributed to the collections on that?
So we can't, because of disclosure laws and because of especially taxpayer rights, we can't disclose anything regarding any specific taxpayers. But I mean, what we can share is that we continuously work to collect. And I know there have been concerns about like business licenses and perhaps the renewal of business licenses if taxpayers have outstanding tax liabilities. But in business license, we actually we require clearances. And so before you are able to renew a business license, you really have to obtain all your tax clearances. You have to go through GRT, income tax, and collections. And so, business licenses aren't renewed if companies have outstanding liabilities. Now, outstanding liabilities, or if there isn't some type of an arrangement in place so that way we're actively collecting from them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Another question about tax amnesty program. So that ended last year. So where are we as far as collecting what's due as part of that program?
With regards to tax amnesty, I believe that the end date for receipt of any of the payments for the amnesty program was in September 2018. And so in terms of payments, we shouldn't be accepting any more payments beyond that deadline because the deadline for payments ended. We're still working on cleaning up some of our some additional items with regards to our the files for the amnesty program, and we're targeting to complete those in the next month. But with regards to amnesty, we're no longer receiving any payments for amnesty.
Yeah, I think I recall seeing something there were still outstanding taxes due, even though the program ended. Let me see if I can find that.
And well, we don't have we're going to provide an updated data on the amnesty, but how it would work is if there was any amounts showing as, outstanding from amnesty, because we're not receiving any payments, those perhaps may be from companies that were not or companies or individuals who may not have been able to make the payments in time for the deadline. Mm-hmm. And because of that, if they're not in compliance, whether it has to do with not filing all returns or not making full payments for their taxes that were due, then those end up being denied, if that's what you're speaking on or referring to. And then, of course, those would revert back to our AR, and we would work to collect on those.
And so would the penalties be implemented at that point for the outstanding balance?
Yeah, so penalties will continue to accrue on those balances.
And interest.
And interest.
Yes. Okay. So I would appreciate if you can provide an update if there are any outstanding balances and the progress and the status of that.
All right. So we'll be able to provide something by week's end in terms of the actual numbers. But as I mentioned, we're targeting to close out because there were still some additional files that we had to review and reconciliations that had to be done. We're still working on making sure that those are done, and we're expecting to actually complete the whole, I guess, process of the whole program process out by in the next month.
And that amnesty program, can you, for the sake of our audience, when did it end? At what time did the government stop accepting applications for amnesty?
Okay, so this is a little complicated because I think that the amnesty application period was, I think, extended a couple times. So if I just hold on a second. So the amnesty application filing period and deadline and also the payment period was extended. And I believe it's, twice, both of them.
Extended, so the initial deadline was
I believe it was June.
June of 2018, and then it was extended twice.
And then it ultimately ended up, the payment portion ended up being extended through September 2018. And I believe the application period was August.
So August was the final.
The final deadline for submitting an application. And then there was a bit of they allowed for some time for payments to come in.
So by September 2019, the end of September 2019, they should have paid it in full. Is that correct?
By end of September 2018.
2018.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So moving on to can you just go back and reiterate the industry audit and compliance program? So what types of industries are involved in that audit?
It could be various industries, and it could really be based on different things. It could be based on something perhaps that someone, they may, I guess, if you want to call it a complaint, or they may come into our office and they may provide information on an industry that they believe is perhaps not complying with all of the rules and the tax laws. And so they may come in that way. It can come in through an individual. It can come in through an organization. It could be something that we notice based on things we may see across the nation. So it really depends. And the types of industries vary, right? So I think at one time, I don't know, maybe like 20 years ago or something, there was, I think there was industry audits on the dental industry, right? So it really depends. Again, it's based on, trends that we may see or things that we may see. I think even public information that we may see, or because we do also monitor what's going on in the media and things like that.
So how many audits, can I ask that question? How many audits are ongoing as far as industry audits, or I just want to get a picture of how active this is.
So when I was speaking with our exam supervisor earlier, because examination is the area where they do industry audits, one, we have, I guess, some real estate sales audits that are ongoing. In terms of how many, that's something that, that's one industry. Again, we are also monitoring the military contracts. But as I understand it, because of lack of human resource, we haven't been able to, to really focus on this particular initiative, and that's something that we're hoping to focus on much more in the future. I think that the last time we really had a lot of focus, as based on our discussions, was maybe back in 2015. So these are things that have been ongoing, but they're not ongoing at the levels that they may have at one point. But those are things that, as we talk about our plans within our agency to work to collect, we talk about looking at, ramping up these certain efforts.
Mm-hmm. So there's a strategic plan in place regarding this?
Right. We don't have a formal strategic plan, but we do have, I guess, group discussions within our agency and amongst our supervisors and administrators on the efforts that we can, initiatives that we can take on so that we can really focus on trying to increase revenues, yes.
Okay, great. I'd be interested to see if that's possible. What is the informal or the draft version of that?
Okay, well, a lot of it is really based on discussions and meetings, and but we can, definitely work to share some information with you.
Okay, thank you. So the next item you have is referral of criminal cases for prosecution. I know there were 2 in the news lately, as of late, but if you can expound on any of that.
And so I guess this is also, so outside of what we've referred for injunction and where you've seen that there have been, I guess, complaints filed with the local courts, which is the first bullet, our criminal investigation branch also works to investigate, cases where there may be tax evasion, and those cases, at the point that they're done with, or that they've reached, if once our criminal investigation branch has reached the point that those cases are ready for referral for prosecution, then they work with the AG's office, and so we do have some cases like that. Our technical research branch also does work on some cases with the AG's office as well, primarily with those cases that have to do with, or where they're, so I have to kind of go back. Our technical research branch, they hear appeals, and so those appeals come from taxpayers that may be in either that have gone through our examination branch or our collections branch. And the purpose of the TRAB, which is Technical Research Branch, is to help to facilitate the process of, coming to agreement between the government and the taxpayer on the issues, and so that their tax cases can be settled. And the idea behind that is to help to reduce the cost of having to go to court for lawyers and other things for both the government and for the individual. But our tax, for some cases that have been referred to or that are actively being, they're active with the AG's office, our TRAB, our technical research branch actually works with those.
So I'd like to offer the floor to my colleague for questions on this particular part on the collection plan and efforts.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Daphne, Ms. Shimizu, and all of you. Just a couple questions. For the one you were just talking about, criminal cases referred to the AG's office, what are you pursuing there? Are you pursuing punishment, or are you actually expecting any money to come out of that?
Hi, Senator. Good morning.
Good morning.
To answer that, with criminal cases, well, first of all, we're referring them for criminal prosecution. All of these cases that we refer generally have a balance tax due, whether it's from evasion, unreported income, willful failure to file cases, or even income tax related currency transaction reports that they fail to file. So yes, ultimately we're looking for prosecution because it's like the last end of the straw. They were unable to, I guess, be compliant, and these cases are litigated in district court. So they also come with, if they're found guilty, with imprisonment, depending on the violation.
What about, can the government of Guam expect any cash to come out of these?
Absolutely. We don't go in there just looking for prosecution. We're looking for the repayment of taxes and also any penalties that are associated with the violations.
What would you say is the, just a ballpark figure, because I know it changes in negotiations, but what has been applied for or request or stated in the facts of the cases as to how much is owed?
Sure, it really varies, you know. We work our criminal cases along with the Attorney General's office, the prosecution division, and in some years they have prosecutors who are willing to take tax cases, and in some years, again, their focus could be on violent crimes. So, you know, we try to refer, like, for example, the felony cases are the evasion cases, and those are high dollar amount cases. We just don't, we look for cases that can set a good example in instilling voluntary compliance. I think the last case we sent probably had that we were successful, the AG's office was successful, and our CI group. I believe it was like 300,000 or 400,000 in unreported tax dollars, tax deficiency, and the individual was sentenced for incarceration. We've had other cases that may have been related to tax violations that they've worked with the AG's office. And I know we have many coming in the pipeline. Again, we just recently hired more agents in our CI branch.
So are you able to give a total number of kind of outstanding criminal cases that we could expect if the AG, of course, put their attention there? That
Not offhand, we weren't prepared to give that amount, but we can find out.
all right, thank you. Are there any that were referred this year in 2019?
I think there are a few in the pipeline that we're still reviewing and we're waiting to send over.
Okay, so the ones that are there might have been older cases.
That's correct.
All right, what about the amount of collections referred to the AG? You list here referred in March 2019, and then, so in March 2019, do you have an amount that was, sought to be collected through the AG's office, and how much you have actually collected?
I don't particularly recall the dollar amount, but the way those referrals were working, we were seeking the AG's office to have the courts provide us with relief to stop the business, to do an injunction for them to cease conducting business. Again, that's the civil side of the last straw of the civil side. If they don't want to become compliant, if they can't come into an installment agreement, we're basically telling them to cease operations because they're just digging a deeper hole if they incur more of a liability. In some respects, we've been successful in some of the cases that have gone down. The taxpayers have sought, again, to speak with our director and trying to avoid litigation and to try to rework installment agreements. So as our director mentioned before, we're not there to close businesses unless they're really, really just fully non-compliant, but we're there to work with them because they generate revenue for our government.
Yes. All right, so in the ones referred in March 2019, what is the result? Some injunctions have been issued?
They're not quite yet. I know the AG's office they're filing, like for example, the initial complaints, the information was filed, and then I believe after that, the taxpayers were afforded the opportunity to file on their defense, and it's still in motion right now. We can't comment on that.
And in follow-up, you said, Shimizu, you're expecting $34 million from base contract, or no, you received $34 million from base contractors in 2017, and so I'm sure you're tracking numbers for 2018 and 2019 also, but are you able to separate out from base contractors those that are like for build-up projects versus regular base contracting?
That I'm not sure. Like I mentioned, what we do is we may, I guess, depending, because we do work with NAVFAC, but I don't have the information on that.
So you're saying NAVFAC provides information that is not available to you on your other source, the usaspending.gov?
Right, because I think the usaspending.gov, if you look at the awards, they may be, I'm not sure that the entire amount of the award for that particular contract is only specifically for the Guam location, or they may be actually for the entire contract that contractor has with the federal government, altogether.
All right, we've talked about this over, the few years that I've been here, and different members of the community have made different suggestions. I guess I don't remember them all, so I'm not an expert in this, but they did make certain suggestions as to how Guam could better track and collect. And I'm wondering, does your monitoring include the subcontractors? I mean, do you really carefully review which subcontractors are being used? And
Respect, with respect to that question, yes. It also reviews the subcontractors because some of them actually would like to take or avail themselves of the subcontractor exemption. And the old law required that these base contractors get contractor's licensing number before. That law was later amended because they found out that a lot of the local subcontractors here couldn't take that exemption. It's to be paid by the prime contractor because the law required a local contractor's licensing number. And the contractors that do business on base aren't under, the regulation of the CLB. So that law was amended in lieu, provide a GRT number, and then they can avail themselves. So yes, we do that because we want to ensure that the taxes are collected at least at the prime level, and that these subcontractors who are taking the exemptions are afforded that likewise.
So, so you collect from the contractors, not necessarily from the subcontractors if they are exempt.
Yeah, that's correct.
I see. Okay, and then just on the, Senator Perez had asked about the 2020 taxes that are predicted, but I'm looking at the 2019 taxes, and I'm just curious if there's something, they're different than what was expected, right? Some are higher, some are lower, and I guess I'm concerned about the lower ones. Is there something that happened that explains the lower actual receipts versus what we had predicted last year? And is that something we should know about in order to look at next year? I think it was, which one went lower? I'm trying to remember. I don't have the CRER in front of me. Do you, I know it's withholding that's higher, right? But the one that was lower, I can't remember.
I'm sorry, I don't recall at this time on the CRER. I know you're referring to the CRER, but I don't recall at this time which ones were running over or under what was projected.
All right. I guess because I'm asking if you're concerned about, did something happen that caused that lower amounts to be collected than what we were predicting to be collected?
I think we'll have to get back to you on that, Senator, if that's
right.
okay.
Yeah, if you could, because that's important to me to know. I thought, we have all the experts that come in to make these predictions, and so I just want to know if there's something, for example, we thought we were going to go and do a certain program, and then we were just not able to because of lack of staff, or something very, maybe concrete that we could put our hands on and either fix to bring the revenues back up, or was it just we made an error and we overestimated and there was no way we could make that amount? Something like that. I want to know so that in 2020 we're just closer, right? And so the withholding looks higher than we predicted. Do you have any explanation for that? I guess that is.
Well, no, and those are things we're still analyzing as well, because we also have been analyzing and noticed that, and so our team has been discussing. But again, because we only have like 7 months of final data through April for the CRER, we'll be coming up to the 20th, and we'll have the 8 months worth of data. But it's a little bit difficult to tell still at this time, why it's tracking in that way.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate your analysis of that, because you're the one who I'm hoping can shed some light on that for us. What about the GRTs? So they raised GRTs at the beginning of last fiscal year, that's right? And so it hasn't been in place except 7 months now? Is that correct? Or when did we raise, when was that raised?
I believe that the first month for the additional 1% was April 2018. April 2018.
April 2018. Oh, okay. So it's been a year.
So it's just now hitting a year.
So for the GRT, we're tracking higher also than we predicted. Is that right? Correct? Yeah. Is there something else, another factor that we should know about, or that's just do you consider that to be just a little bit off?
Of course, when the GRT rate was increased, there was an expectation that we would see the increase in GRT. But again, really, we've only seen the 1 year worth of data on that. I'm really not sure. There were other factors that may have contributed to that. Perhaps it could be there were some QCs that may have expired, or things like that that have happened in like larger industries that may be attributed to that. But I don't know how much of that may be attributed to those. But again, of course, the 1% increase is significant, right? Because that was a 25% increase, and so of course the expectation is that GRT number would go up.
So they expected it to go up, but it went up a little bit more than they expected. So I'm just curious how to explain that. And so then for 2020, I guess I want to know, so how do we predict for 2020 whether it's going to go up or stay the same? Do you have any thoughts on that?
And that's something that we're still having to work to analyze. Again, it's difficult because we only have like the 7 months worth of data for this year. So it's a little bit hard to tell with just limited data.
Do you foresee anything significantly changing that might impact GRTs in the next year?
Well, I just wanted to add, Senator, to make that kind of comment is pretty contingent upon some of the upcoming legislations to roll the GRT back. So if you do roll back GRT, you will see an impact on the revenues for GRT. And then I guess it goes hand in hand with how the legislature approaches to do that. I think there's 2 versions. One is to do the minimum wage increase, and as a relief to roll the GRT back. But anytime you reduce a tax rate, you expect a revenue reduction. That's just,
Yes, well, those are the obvious. That's what, of course. So when the tax rate was raised, we expected an increase, and yeah, those are obvious. So what I'm asking you for is when it differs from what's projected to be the increase or the decrease, then how do you explain those things? If we take, for example, last year they took the GRT receipts and they calculated if we increase GRT by this much, then we will receive this much more. But we've received more than that, so I'm asking you if there's any other significant event or perhaps the QCs changing that impacted the receipts of GRT. Those are the non-obvious to everybody else. And of course, if we change the law, we change collections. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if we continued with the laws as they are they're predicting an increase in GRT, and I'm asking how do you explain that? What is going to change in the next year that will change the amount of GRTs that we are receiving?
Yeah, and that's something that, again, I guess with regards to the executive budget, we'd have to discuss with perhaps the BBMR and the rest of the fiscal team before we could be able to really answer that question.
Okay, if you could please, yes, give that some thought and analysis, because I respect your experience in this area and that you are really looking at these things carefully. And we want to be able to rely on these numbers, and that's how we make these decisions, I think, or I can't speak for everyone, but that's how we make decisions whether we can decrease the GRTs, right? If we can decrease those because we can predict this much to come in, even if we decreased it, that's reliable, and we can even consider things like that. So I appreciate your efforts in that regard. So and then for the 140 million receivable, when do you expect that to be collected?
Okay, so the 140 million, of course, is made up of different categories as well. There may be some bankruptcies. There may be, some that we're actively working on because we have different categories within this particular AR, and so it's difficult to tell when all of that will come in. Again, we're actively working to collect and.
Okay. Let me ask you. Are you able to pinpoint how much of this you might be able to collect in 2019, and how much of this you will not be able to collect in 2019? You can predict that type of thing, right?
Well, we'll have to, I guess, work to get back to you on what our projection is for, I guess, how much of this we're expecting to collect on.
Okay, yeah, the reason I'm asking again is because last year when they were in here talking about, how much we can really collect, there was a big debate about it, right? And so there's even, I think, until today, there's still a debate as to how much we can actually really collect. They had described some of this was, they were not actively collecting or pursuing because they could not locate these people. Some of it was in litigation and it's clearly not expected within the year or within the 6 months left in the year, things like that.
Right, and I will share with you that when we came in early in January, February, we began, when we looked at the breakdown of of our AR, we looked at the different categories, one of which was litigation. Some of them, again, were bankruptcy. And what we did was we actually reached out to the AG's office, to the prosecution section regarding those that were in litigation so that we can make sure that we're actively working to make progress on these cases. So, it's difficult to tell again when we'll be able to collect on some of them because it is true. There are times that we cannot contact a taxpayer, and we do our best to. We call, we send notices, and we still can't contact them. But again, what I'm proud of is that we've looked at the categories and where there were areas that we thought we needed to address, like for example in litigation, and where we hadn't when we came in. Had updated information on where those cases may be. We did reach out to the AG's office for those cases, and we've been actively working with the AG's office on certain cases that are in litigation so that we can again get those moving and get resolution.
Do you have a number of cases in the district court, not for injunction, but for collection? I mean, for like a lien and then the just that we can expect money on?
I mean, we do have some cases. We actually have, I think, a case that's going to be, I guess, starting to be heard in this next month. We, of course, had in this last, I think, was the last year, there was, of course, what was published was the SDA case, which is now not in the district court, but is in the local court. But we do have cases like that, which, are seen in the paper and which, again, we are part of.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, I'm just actually going back to the last year's report about the master accounts receivable list. So of the 155 million, 89 million was active cases. So that's subtracting out bankruptcy, delinquency, inactive litigation. So what is the collection plan for the active accounts?
What we've done or what we've been working on is, so our collections team, they have, like, I guess we call them units. They can have thousands of units to work to collect. And so we've recognized the difficulty in trying to manage your caseload, meaning all the cases you have. If you have, for example, if we have like about 45,000 units and we only have 30 revenue officers, right? So, they have thousands of units that they may be working on to collect, and a unit is like a GRT return for a period or a tax return for a period. That's a unit. And so what we've implemented is we actually have an individual who is the one that works to generate or helps to manage the caseload by generating and monitoring caseload. And so that individual assists in helping the revenue officers so that they can focus on just really working to collect versus trying to manage all of the files that I have, because it can be quite overwhelming. And because we've really been pushing our collections team, they actually are going out more than they've gone out, before. They're getting a lot more calls and working with our taxpayers on things, it becomes difficult again to manage. So that's one thing that we've been working on, so that way it's a little bit easier for them to manage, and it's one less thing for them to think about. So that's one thing that we've implemented in terms of our collections efforts.
What additional resources would you need to, let's say, if you
Yeah,
aggressively wanted to go out and collect the 89 million, or what additional resources are needed?
Well, I mean, we believe that it's going to be important for us to actually ramp up our staffing and our training. Our revenue officers have not received actual training for several years. What we've implemented in-house is we've worked to make sure that we've done some training, even if it's in-house training. So we've tried to be as resourceful as we can with the limited resources that we have. Our revenue officer, our senior revenue officer has actually done some training already with our collections team, and they're continuing to work to create like a curriculum so that we can at least at the very basic level work to get them some training. We're hoping that in the next fiscal year that we'll be able to have the IRS come out and we'll get funding for that so that we can have IRS training in this next year. We're hoping actually that we can target maybe end of September, early October to get the IRS here. And that will be very critical because it's been, I think, over 5 years since we've actually had IRS training for our team. And, those things are very important. When we started, we had a few revenue officers that didn't have actual phone units, like the actual phone. So, those were things that we worked, that were kind of simple fixes that we said, okay, it's very difficult to collect and to be communicating with taxpayers if you don't even have a phone. And so we got those, but of course we're going to need, and we put in our fiscal year 2020 budget some funding for full desktop, for entire workstations, which would include the desktops, includes UPSs, because we actually have UPSs that don't work. We have people who don't have UPSs, and that's very dangerous. And what our plan is in terms of technology is to work to try to replenish or to change out all of our workstations every 3 years, right? So we have a 3-year warranty on a 3 to 5 year warranty on a desktop or a laptop. Then we change it out the next when the warranty ends, right, in the next 5 years. And so we've put a lot of that into our FY 2020 budget because that's important. But really, the human resource, also the equipment that's associated with those human resources, and we're going to need to figure out how to put those people. And if you've been to our office, Senator, and the space is although we have a huge space, it perhaps is not as efficient as it could be in terms of housing people, and so there's going to be some need for making some or retrofitting our spaces so that way we can make better use of them to house people, because we have still a couple years left on our lease there.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to the next item, which is enforcement of bed and breakfast and short-term vacation rentals.
Okay, yeah. And so that's one of the next slide, if we can go back to our PowerPoint presentation. Okay, the next slide, please. So with regards to the enforcement of bed and breakfast and short-term vacation rentals, our current status is, well, we have actually issued notices of violation, and I'm very proud of our team. It took a lot of work. How we did that was we monitored websites like Airbnb, Naver. Our team did field surveillance, meaning they actually go out and they're monitoring and doing operations, monitoring these potential violators. We did look at both, there is an issue, the law allows us to penalize both, and issue notices of violation for both non-licensed and improperly licensed B&Bs and short-term vacation rentals. And what we did was we focused first on the non-licensed, right? We wanted to go after the people who really don't have a business license, because that was our focus, and that's what we did. What we found, and the reason that we ended up kind of approaching it in that way is because what we found was the majority of people actually have business license. They're just not the correct business license, right? So you may have a license for a room rental, but it's not a B&B, but you're running a B&B. And so those were the things that we found, and those are a little bit more challenging to, I guess, to identify, but that's what we found. We did do outreach, through press releases. I've been in the media talking about how we're going to be doing these things, and so that's, again, what we've done. We did list some challenges on this slide. Of course, we have a shortage of manpower. It's our compliance branch, our APC group, that does enforcement on this, and they do enforcement on several things, and so it's a bit challenging with regards to manpower in that area. Again, go back to our computer systems. We actually, as I understand it, based on our COA, he's advised that 75% of our team is running off of Windows Vista, which is, I think, was released back in 2007, and so there's probably been like another 4 releases beyond that, and so our systems are slow, and it's difficult at times to download information and things like that because our operating systems are older. And then we also have a shortage in that area. We have shortages in, we don't have two-way radios. We, there are things, and there's equipment that our team needs, and also training. I think most, especially because well, again, a lot of this stuff is new. We're actually very fortunate that we have a very good compliance supervisor who has experience with regards to, I guess, undercover operations and things like that. He has that kind of background, and so that's been helpful to us. But, definitely training for our other team members, and so then that way we can ramp up our enforcement. We've come out and said before it's impossible to do 100% enforcement. And even to try to do 100% enforcement may not even be, in terms of cost, may not really, the cost may outweigh the benefit, right? So like even, for example, to try to get 100% of speeders, it's not possible. So the same with us. So our strategy has been to work to, I guess, kind of to refer back to what our Deputy Tax Commissioner was kind of talking about, to try to set a precedent by, looking at areas where we can really show the, I guess, the people who are violating that, we're really serious, and to motivate them to come in. So our team has been really working on that, but we could really use some funds for training, and again, funds for manpower and equipment.
So I believe there was a number that was floated as far as there were, I think, approximately 400 bed and breakfasts on Guam. How far have you gotten to as far as locating those and taxing them?
Okay, so some of the difficulty with I guess looking at some of those websites, there are websites that are not in English. That's one challenge that we face. But with regards to the web, like for example, the Airbnb, I know, I think what was published in the paper was that there was like 300 or 400, I guess. Locations listed that you can rent from there. That's on Guam. We actually use, like I mentioned, we do monitor, or we have used that as kind of one of the prime areas that we look at in trying to address this issue. Of course, there are challenges with monitoring that as well. Sometimes the name may be, I don't know, Stacy, and so you don't really know who you are dealing with. But our team has actually been very good in trying to, in reviewing, and they've looked at locations, and they figure out where those locations are so that they can, go out and again determine whether or not there's a violation or not. And so we do monitor those areas. And in terms of looking at, I guess, how many, sometimes, although it may say 300 or 400, I think if you'll notice, some of them may be duplicates, right? So I'm not sure that amount is actually the actual amount of businesses or people that are operating. Someone may list their home or their room twice or more, and I noticed that when I was looking at that, so the count there may not exactly be correct, like if you're looking at actual individual locations that you can rent. But we do use that, and again, like I mentioned, what we found as we did more investigation is Of the ones that we've looked at, a lot of them actually have some type of a business license, but that license may just not be the correct one. And again, that's our next step, is to, now that we've issued notices of violation to those unlicensed operators, our next step now is, well, to make sure that, one, I think we've already been very clear to the media and made sure that we've done some outreach to share that our next step is to do enforcement on and give notices of violation to those operators that don't have the right license. But what I think is really positive that has fallen out of all of this is our team has worked actively with operators to get them into compliance. We've had our business license and our compliance team actually work with companies to get them the right license, because a lot of it has to do with education. And I believe that when we met with Airbnb recently, and we met with GVB, one of the items that GVB has on their agenda in the forum that they're going to be holding later on this year is to do some education. I think what was great about the conversation that we had with when we met with Airbnb and with the team that was discussing things at that meeting is, there is some level of confusion in terms of what Airbnb is, right? So on Airbnb, you can actually have, there are actually hotels, motels, room rentals. There are different classifications of lodging that's actually being advertised there. So they may not all be bed and breakfasts, right? They may be, again, different things. But we've done our best to use that platform as one of our primary sources of information. We've looked at it, and we're continuing to use those platforms to identify people who are not compliant.
Thank you. I would like to pass the floor to Senator Therese.
Yeah, just real quickly, can you give us some numbers? Like, for example, the short-term vacation rentals weren't even being licensed last year at this time. So
Right.
since then, now do we have any?
And well, in B&Bs, we now have 16 licensed B&Bs, where we had 0.
Okay.
B&Bs, I think, is a little bit, there are lots of requirements for B&Bs. Your bed has to be so many inches. You can only have 30 inches around, the front and the one side of the bed. So it's very challenging to be a B&B. It's very challenging to comply with what's in the law. But we have 16 where we didn't have any. And so I think that's a great kind of stride, I think, for us. Since we started with 0, it's more than 100% increase.
Do you mean the B&Bs? I thought we had like 4, and so has that what about short-term rentals then?
We didn't have any B&Bs
Okay.
that were licensed.
So what about short-term rentals?
We now have 5
5 short-term
Right.
rentals and 16 current B&Bs.
current
Okay.
licenses.
Okay, great. And so I heard your efforts, and I'm commending you for those. Thank you for your team for going out and doing that. So this is the compliance branch that's like in charge of this.
So our compliance and business branch team, they work very closely together.
Licensing.
Because the business license group is the one that issues the license, the compliance team, they issue the notices of violation. So they both have to be pretty knowledgeable on, all areas, so that way we can make sure, that at the time the business licenses are issued, that, when they're issued, the compliance team is aware of what the requirements are, and
Sure.
the other way around, so we're not erroneously or, not giving, so we're always giving the proper information to the licensees.
Yeah. I guess I'm just a little bit concerned because of the news stories that have come out saying there are hundreds of these short-term rentals or B&Bs really in Guam. And then since those stories have come out, people, they just talk on the street, and we hear a lot more about them. Oh, do you know there's one over there in the corner, near the hospital, things like this. And so I'm very, very curious as to whether we can get a very concrete plan. And if you can tell us things like, if you give me one more employee, we've already made a plan, and we know this is what we can accomplish with the one, per person, we can accomplish this. And at this rate, we are going to, we will have examined all 300 on the Airbnb list for Guam, or we won't by the end of the year, right? That kind of thing. I just want to know how concrete we can get.
Well, one of the requirements really in the law, so One of the requirements in the law is that the business license number or the license number be advertised on any advertisement for a B&B or STVR, which I get. So if anybody is advertising a B&B or STVR without their license number being advertised, that's already a violation, right? So that's kind of the first thing. So one thing we talked about with Airbnb when we met with them was, is there a field that can be utilized in their website so that way once licenses are issued to these operators, that they can make sure that they're complying with the law, because right now, if you look at any advertisement without a license number, that's already a violation.
I see. Yeah, that's a great idea. So we're very optimistic about this partnership with Airbnb that the GVB and you have reached. That I know that GVB is very concerned about getting information to these people who are staying in these short-term rentals or B&Bs in case of emergencies, and of course to track them, to help them to get services, things like this. But yes, of course, we're also interested in the taxes on these things. So
absolutely, our prime concern is making sure that we're collecting on taxes. But we always when we make agreements have to consider as well. Make sure that we've dotted our I's and crossed all our T's in terms of making sure that our contracts meet, our needs as well, because, so that's what's happening with the Airbnbs.
Yes, I'm wondering.
Excuse me, Senator. What would also be helpful, though, is because sometimes we are trying to, we're reviewing sites that are not English, would be also hugely helpful to us is to have people who, who speak foreign languages and read foreign languages to assist us as well. Because that's been one of our challenges. We have our team and they're really great and they really try to interpret as much as they can, but they can only read so much, and they can't read a foreign language, obviously.
Yeah, sure. That's what I mean by a concrete plan. If we can very much predict that we will read all the English postings on Airbnb by this month, and that we will read all the Korean language postings by this month, or what other websites there are, and that way I think you can plan resources too. And I think GVB will help you with those resources because they're very interested in getting that done. They already have translators for their services that they provide, and maybe those people can also contract with Revenue Tax. I'm not sure, but yeah, if you can come up with a plan, I'm sure the senators would be open to hearing that we are very interested in this. It's been predicted by the Hotel Restaurant Association that there are many of these, and they put a number on it that we were losing. I think in one point they were estimating like over 20 million, right? I can't remember correctly, but I think that's the number they were throwing out at one time. And so that's what we're looking to see. Are we going to be able to collect that this year? Is this really, have you ruled it out as false? And that's the kind of information, if you could.
Okay. And and it's difficult to say really what's considered this tax leak, and to clarify or confirm those numbers, without knowing how those were derived.
Right. So we can have more discussions on that, but I guess because you already know who's going to be doing the enforcement on this, if you could, and how they are doing it so far. You've outlined a nice plan, but just maybe make it just really solid by saying, put numbers to it. We're going to get this much done by in 2 months, this much in 2 months, and then
and
so we know if we're not happy with that pace, that it's because you need one more person or an entire team just to monitor this area because it's so huge. I'm not sure.
Well, our compliance team is actually, part of their wish list. They've asked for at least 4 more people because we do monitor several things. Our compliance team takes care of the ABC branch, which we have board meetings twice a month, and that's required. They also take care of our ABC, our alcohol licensing.
Alcohol monitoring out in the bars?
Yes, and so also they take care of our control cannabis board meetings, and that's something that's really a heavy focus for us right now because we want to make sure that the rules and regs that fall out of that our good rules and regs, and that we, again, have dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's on that before we, we have a responsibility to the public to make sure that those are good rules and regs. So that also falls under our compliance branch. And another area that is falling under our compliance branch as well at this time is the enforcement at the Liberation Carnival, which we began this past weekend. And so our team, as I mentioned, I think, one of the primary or one of the most important things that we can provide to them at this time is human resource, and that will be, hugely helpful, human resource and equipment.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to the next item, pending rules and regulations. So Stroll Guam, bed and breakfasts. What are the, and of course we know the cannabis.
Yes, and so I'm sorry, we do have a slide on that, and thank you, because we missed, we did miss the Cannabis Control Board. So if you go to the next slide. So we do have pending work that we have to work on, the rules and regs for Stroll Guam, which is, I guess, the Guam version of Uber. Regarding bed and breakfast and short-term vacation rentals, that's not pending because the language in the law, it states that we may adopt rules and regs, and so we've already implemented that. And again, as you mentioned, Senator, there's the control cannabis, there's the CCB, there's the regulations regarding recreational marijuana, which we're actively working on at this time.
What is the status of the Stroll Guam?
Actually, that's something that is still needing to be worked on. Our team actually has yet to approach, I guess, the AG's Office for Assistance with regards to that. So that's something that we have to put on our list of items to work on.
So is there a lack of staff to facilitate the task?
Yes, absolutely. So this is our business license branch that's actually working on this particular area. And in all of our areas, we really are in need of resources. But so especially right now, we're dealing with a lot of business license renewals, and so that's a little bit more urgent at this time, in terms of the work to try to get those licenses out versus, again, working on some of these other things. So unfortunately, we don't have the resources to do everything, and we have to work to prioritize. And at this time, that particular initiative or those particular rules and regs, have fallen down on in terms of our priority to work on at this time.
Okay. Yeah. No, we can ask at this point.
Oh, what about the tobacco stamp? What's the status of that?
So the tobacco stamp tax is something that has not been implemented. And that's something that, our team, I know that they did some work on trying to, I guess, identify or determine the cost of the stamps and the cost of, these machines and other things, but that has not been implemented as of yet.
Is there a plan? I mean, is there like a timeline that we're working on? Because that was another one of those bills that when they, put it in, the prediction for income was huge, right? It was going to be that. That's what we were looking for to avoid tax increases, is those types of measures to be implemented.
And just to give you a little update on that, I know one of our staff in the AG's office, they actually went to Hawaii and visited Hawaii's program regarding the stamp tax. But a couple of things have come up that are, on the legislation that are unfunded. And one of them is not just the production of the stamps, because if we produce the stamps, we can sell them and recover costs, but actually the machines to actually put the stamps on the cigarette packs themselves. So I think one of the issues at hand was whether the machines would be provided by these wholesalers who would put them on, or would it be provided by the government? And I think it still needs further discussion. But I know a couple other things that are being looked at to address maybe that stamp tax issue, is possibly revisiting how taxes are with respect to tobacco taxes, taxing it at point and removing the stamp tax need and the bonded warehouse need. But again, those are just, I think, what's being circulated in the community.
Taxing it where? Point of entry?
That's correct.
Well, I don't remember that being brought up during the tobacco stamp discussion, but it sounds like a
I think just recently it's a discussion that I think is happening right now, just right? It's probably informal, and maybe I shouldn't have, at least
Okay.
moved on that, but I think that discussion is happening now.
All right, well then I'm just going to throw this out there. I think one of the issues with the tobacco stamp was they were concerned about tobacco coming into Guam kind of illegally, so not being tracked at all. And I'm just wondering if we're taxing it at point of entry, we're obviously going to continue to not catch a lot of it because they're not catching a lot of it right now. I mean, I don't know, those are just my lay thoughts. Not sure, unless we're going to get 100% inspection.
Yeah.
We don't have that.
Well, we do, we are in charge of the bonded warehouse. And so, with regards to the bonded warehouse, our team is actually out there, and they have to be out there anytime that anytime that bonded warehouses for any of the wholesalers are open, whether it's to put product in or to take product out. And so those ones, our team is actually on site with them,
Right.
sometimes for days, making sure that we're monitoring those items.
Yes, no, and my understanding is that that system works, right? But it's the other tobacco coming in. We wanted to be able to see immediately that it did not have a stamp, so we know it's coming in not through those bonded warehouses or these companies, but perhaps some other way. That was the gap, right? Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator. I know, I think Customs has always been looking to improve the border protection, and if they can improve on the tracking system, I think they've been in discussions and trying to acquire some more sophisticated tracking system that is costly, but I can't speak for them. I just know what's been dialogued over the past years. But that's just a thought that's come up. Because if we do pursue the stamp tax issue, it requires more manpower, more investment, and when this law passed, it came without the funding to accompany that. So that's why we haven't really moved on it.
Sure. Can you give us the last minutes of whatever of your meeting that show what you've predicted the cost to be for the government, or if it's implemented by the companies, how that would work, and we can maybe take it from there. And
I don't know if there's not any minutes, but what our team has done was they just tried to, I guess, come up with some calculation. So we can go back, revisit that, because it's been a while since I think this has been discussed. So we can come back and provide some information on that.
If I may just reiterate, it's very important. Either you send back a report saying unimplementable because of this, otherwise we're going to keep calling you on it. And why is it not implemented? Why are we not getting the, I don't know how many million they were predicted we were going to get? That's what the taxpayers look to us. Why are you continuing to raise taxes if we have all these programs that are not implemented? We have to answer to that. So I'm saying if it's not implementable, send us something in writing that says why, or if there was funding for this one piece, send us that. You know what I mean? Just let's get the real concrete. The discussions have been going on for quite a while already.
I'm sorry. I think one thing that's been discussed previously that's kind of just slipped through the back burner again was the law itself. I think there was some confusion too at the time that the law was implemented, that would this replace the tobacco tax, or was it in addition to? And I think it was pointed out in the very first hearing, even through the OPA's office, that might have brought some confusion. So is the tobacco tax being replaced by the stamp tax, or is it an additional tax imposed in addition to the tobacco tax? And that wasn't really provided clarity, so either we need to address that through rules and regs, or maybe the law needs to be amended to clarify that point. I think that was brought up before, even in the OPA's position when that law was first introduced.
All right, well, I'm not going to interpret it here because I thought it was clear,
Again, I'm
but
pulling this
if
through
you could put that
recollection.
in writing, perhaps, at least.
Sure. We
I
can
think
talk
that
with
would
our
be
team.
very helpful. We need to do it formally, right? Send it back to the legislature with a report saying you cannot implement it or you cannot move forward at this point because of this, and let's see what happens after that.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
We noted. We all note that.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to the next item, technology needs and updates.
Yes, and so we can refer back to our PowerPoint presentation because we have a slide on this. So, With regards to our technology needs, again, we mentioned with regards to our computers, they're outdated, and our equipment, and we don't have either, those people that do have UPSs, they may not work, so we have issues with that. We don't have a sufficient number of photocopiers and printers and scanners, so we have quite a few large groups that are sharing a single photocopier, and that's something that we need to work to address. We have insufficient manpower to provide support for our troubleshooting, and OTEC is really great. I know that they do their best to provide support to us, but in this last couple months, we lost one of our computer network troubleshooting people, which means that we only had 2 at that time. So that means we only have one person who basically works to troubleshoot for about 180 people. And of course, again, OTEC does step in, but one thing that we would like is to have more resources in terms of that. And then we do have a need to work to relocate our server. At this time, as you know, we're under fire watch, and we're working on getting our fire sprinkler system up and running. But if we get our fire sprinkler system up and running in that area where our server is, if there is like a fire situation, our servers are going to get wet, and so what we're going to need to do is work to make sure that we secure our servers and our data. So we're planning on trying to move our server to another location within our agency or within our building, and then to have a dry suppression system as opposed to having that fire sprinkler system. And we can move to the next slide.
Just a quick question. So OTEC used to be under Department of Revenue and Taxation, is that correct?
I believe that, I don't know if it was OTEC, but I believe that we did have prior in-house people that worked on our technology or our IT before, and then of course that was, I guess, centralized or absorbed under OTEC when OTEC was created.
Okay. Okay, yes. Any questions? You can move on to the next slide.
Okay, so with regards to our human resource status and needs, so we do have significant human resource issues, and we actually have some preliminary information, but we didn't provide it in this schedule, which we'll work to provide to you on how many additional people that we believe that we do need. But of course, because of lack of resources in terms of in the human resource area, we're seeing some delays in processing of returns and GRT returns, forms 3260. That was something that was brought out in the performance audit by the public auditor when he did the performance audit for the limited gaming audit on the nonprofit bingo operators. And so that's one item that we run into issues with. Of course, it causes issues with our wait time, and then difficulty again in implementing some unfunded mandates, and so, or mandates that have the ability to be funded at a later time, but until certain things get off the ground are not funded. So we do have a significant need for additional staff, and that's something that we need to address as well. We can go to the next slide.
Just a question about the delay. So how far back is the processing in regards to like income taxes or 3260s? What is the...
So for GRT returns, which is business privilege tax returns, and the returns, so the forms 3260 are processed with those business privilege tax returns. The public auditor's report, which was just issued just a few months ago, stated that there were processing like about 14 months behind. So meaning that for a return, so we are actually processing after 14 months that the return, 14 months after the return has been filed, and that was what was indicated in the public auditor's report.
But wasn't that only for the limited gaming industry?
So those forms are actually part of the stack that's included in BPT. And in fact, I think what happened when that performance audit was performed is we had to pull out those 3260s from the files where there are BPT returns in them, because they're all together.
So all business privilege tax
Yes.
processing is
We're
delayed.
behind, yes. And we do, even outside of trying to get additional staff for our team, we've been discussing perhaps trying to detail additional staff to that group or doing some reorganization so that we can make sure that we have people that are processing there. And again, we've been in active discussion internally to try to figure out a strategy for addressing the backlog in those.
Okay. About how much staff do you think you would need to speed up? Obviously, it's a technology issue as well, because if I think there were filers, electronic filing, it would help speed the process up.
Absolutely. So I know, I have our business license supervisor here, and she's saying she believes that if we had at least another 6 people that we can work to get those up to date. But you do bring up a good point, Senator, with regards to technology. And regarding technology, you know, of course, those people that file their GRT returns online, those actually get up in there. Once it's filed, it's in our system. It's in our database. We can pull those up in the AS400 and we can review those data. So those are real time once it's filed online. The challenge that we run into, of course, is with regards to the if there's any payments that is required to be made with a BPT return or with any return that's paid online, is there's a convenience fee or there's a charge, right? So you pay a little bit more for that for paying by a credit card versus if you were to walk in and pay at the Treasurer of Guam cashier with cash or check. And so there are people who, of course, because there's additional more cost involved, there are people who, most people choose to, not pay. I'm sure there are people who are dissuaded or not motivated to pay online because of that. So I know we've had discussions about the possibility of moving towards, requiring online filing, and I believe that would be absolutely helpful for us if we were to move toward that. But I think that it's going to have to be some type of a phased approach, because we can't just require online filing without addressing the issue of the convenience fee, right? One idea that was tossed around, and this was actually even brought up during the transition time when the finance transition team was making a presentation back in December, was the possibility of perhaps having a fee that's associated with credit cards only when you walk in to the Treasurer of Guam cashier, and not having a fee when you're paying online. And the reason being, then that will help to motivate people. There's motivation to pay online and to file online, so that there's motivation to pay online and file online, and then those are real time, and then the payments are there. So some of the justification for doing some of that would be, of course, when you come in to file a paper return, there's manual processing that's involved. So I think, there is some justification for having some fee because of the manual processing. But once it's paid online and filed online, if we can get all of our forms online, then we can get those paid and filed without any convenience fee. Then those are automatically, they're real-time online, and once it's filed, it's there. And so that's something I'm not sure how the mechanism would work with regards to the credit card companies and how such merchant services could be set up or not. But that's an idea that was brought up even early on in the administration, and I think it's something that perhaps we can continue or work to discuss with DOA, because DOA does is the agency that deals with our banking and merchant services.
About staffing, are there issues within Department of Revenue and Taxation where you may have a workforce within Department of Revenue and Taxation that lacks the skill set to perform their duties and positions? So let's say you have more staffing in one area, whereas you can detail them to another area, but they just need additional training.
Absolutely. I mean, like we mentioned earlier, there's always a need for more training, and our people, it's been a while since they've had training. We've been fortunate to be able to avail of some training for free in this year. Our team was able to work with the courts, and we were able to get a little bit of training from the courts recently, and that was free of charge. We also had done some in-house training. Again, of course, we have been working to try to be as resourceful as possible with the limited amount of funding that we have. But, so with regards to trying to make sure that we have good, competent people, yeah, absolutely. I mean, training is going to be critical, but we do already utilize people in different areas. So for example, right now, because we're doing overtime to make sure that we're able to stay on top of the processing of our income tax returns for this 2018 income tax filing season. We have people from different branches that are helping our income tax CDP branch, accounting branches to process returns. So, I think one thing that would be very critical in terms of trying to get our people, again, the term is, competent or trained, is to have that additional training and have those additional training opportunities.
Does the 2020 budget do you think it reflects the needs as far as increase in staffing to support the DRT's mission?
With regards to the FY 2020 budget, when we were looking at the amount of resources that we would have, in terms of funding, we tried to make sure that we allocated funding where we, for some of the kind of the more basic needs, and so there wasn't any projected increases in our staffing, unfortunately, in the FY 2020 budget, just because we had to figure out how to kind of reallocate the resources in certain areas. Some of our contractual amounts increased in this last year. For example, our rent increased, I believe about maybe $20,000 to $30,000 a month, and beginning just this end of the last year, coming into this year. So that's about $360,000 more for rent. And perhaps warranted, but again, those monies are used for, something that provides a service to our agency, but perhaps doesn't allow for us to increase our staffing. Also, our contractual arrangement as well with some of our IT services have gone up in this last year as well. So again, those are things that we had to work to figure out how to, when we tried to work to figure out how to allocate our resources, we had to kind of pick and choose. And, what was important for us is making sure that our people and the staff, although we need more resources, that our people have at least the basic equipment and resources that they need first, so that they can do what they need, so that we can, and perhaps down the line get more people. But so we did our best to again allocate the resource, allocate what we allocate the fund, the monies or the budget for this coming year the best that we could. But we didn't project for increases in staffing.
Yeah, so I think that's important. And when we're moving forward to the next year, it's important to adjust based on the needs to increase revenues. I know you have to reflect also the increases in contractual requirements. That reminds me, is there an opportunity to rebid some of these contracts so we can get a better pricing on them?
As far as I know, at this time, I'm not aware of any that we are able to rebid at this time.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'm confused a little bit about this need for more people to avert long lines at Department of Motor Vehicles or the Division of Motor Vehicles, because wasn't that the division that there was additional money given to DRT, I think last year, for staff, maybe in the last 2 years because of this. It was exactly the same conversation. We need more money in order to process, to collect, right? Or we need more staff in order to collect. We need more money, more staff. That's why the lines are so long at DMV. And so I remember after that, them coming in and reporting on the lines at DMV getting shorter, that they didn't have that significant issue anymore, and that they opened up another branch over here in the Ganya Shopping Center. We didn't know about that until it was done. They opened it up, and that was also supposed to alleviate long lines, but are you telling me that even with those additional employees in collections and motor vehicles, that motor vehicles still doesn't have enough to handle the lines?
When I put DMV, I meant actually our driver's license, but you're right, the satellite office does take up their driver's license, but if you recall, even back in this past March, we opened up on Saturdays, for 5 Saturdays in the month of March, to make sure that we gave people the opportunity to come out and to get the real ID, because we had this really huge influx of need for the real ID because of what's happening with, I guess, the deadline. At least at that time, it had to do with the deadline for our naval base to continue to, or not to continue to accept non-real ID compliant IDs. Now, and I think that that's had a lot to do with the increase that we're seeing in terms of our driver's license section. And although we did hire a few people, there's still a need. And in fact, in this next year, because the deadline for, the final deadline for real ID, the real ID compliant IDs to be implemented across the nation is October 2020. So we're going to be undertaking an education outreach effort to make sure that people know that October 2020 is, at this point is my understanding that our bases have some discretion in terms of the ID that you can present for accessing. But once October 2020 hits, then there will be no discretion. Of course, you can, of course, people have passports, but some people that don't have passports may need the real ID. So, we do see a large increase in the number of people coming to get real IDs. And that may be what's really attributing to a lot of the increase in what we're seeing in the lines.
Is that a short-term need then? For example, for 6 months, you're going to have a high demand and then you go back to normal operations in that division?
Perhaps it can be. One thing we were talking about with our driver's license supervisor is also we have 2 different types of ticketing systems, or if you will call it that. Here at the Ganya satellite location, we actually have a kiosk, and you go in and you type in your name, and your name goes into a queue, and then, of course, your name will pop up at the time that it's your turn to go see our driver's license examiner who's going to assist you. At the Barrigada, we want to also work to try to implement that type of a system. So we have a more automated system. I mean, even at this time, because of the power fluctuation, I guess, and because we didn't have a UPS, our sign that indicates, serving number 100 actually is down. So, things like that kind of will help us to alleviate, but I mean, it could be a short-term thing, yes, Senator, but at that time it's really difficult to tell. And until I guess we hit the October 2020 deadline maybe, then it will be again difficult to tell, because again, we're going to be doing outreach. Even I think at this time, people are still not understanding or familiar with what it really means to have a real ID and what a real ID really is.
So right now, the lines are we're having those very long lines like we did before?
I mean, I think that we're seeing a decrease in the lines, but I know of people who still have waited for 2 hours, but they've said, well, it's better than when they were waiting for 4.
No,
again,
8 hours.
It just kind of
depends. Some people
depends.
waited 6,
Yeah.
7 hours, and that, I mean, so many people.
Yeah.
So that's when the real ID was first being implemented. But
And what's also been helpful as well is that we have a system for making appointments online. And
yes.
so,
Well, that was also in place at that time, but this expansion was not there at that time. So I'm hoping this increased cost is saving people time in line, because it's a significant cost, I'm thinking, to rent out another space and put employees there, additional employees, right?
Right, and I mean, and I guess from our perspective, we believe it does provide value. One, it provides a location that's outside of Barragata for those people who are probably in this kind of more central or southern area. That's one. Two, if you go to the satellite office, then, you don't kind of get, because like, for example, early in the morning, even before 8, we have people lined up outside our office.
That's not their complaint.
Yeah.
Their
Yeah.
complaint is how long they wait in line. So that's
Yes.
really all I want to know is how long are the lines now? Have you taken care of that, or are you telling me now that we're back to having hours wait for an ID?
Again, it just depends on the day and how many people come in a day. I'm really, at
right.
the
Well-
time, sorry.
That's just, maybe you can break that out better, because it's confusing given that we did increase the number of staff, particularly for motor vehicles, and we did increase the number of collection staff. So the other things that you're saying you need staff for sound reasonable to me. You need additional because we put in a new system for tobacco stamp, right? We put in, or we're requiring now that you're going to enforce these B&Bs, the short-term rentals. Those things, maybe your existing staff, that would be an additional burden.
Yeah,
But for the things that we've already went through for 2 years, talking back and forth about the need to increase collections, the need to shorten the lines at motor vehicles, and then, we were told we need more staff, and I thought that was addressed.
Right, and then, and please excuse, perhaps this one actually was, it wasn't, it was probably more associated with the need for additional equipment, because we do want to get the equipment, the same type of a kiosk and software system that we have at the satellite
That
up there.
kiosk makes it faster, you're saying?
Well, it will help, absolutely, and the reason why is because right now we have this pull tab system,
Yeah.
and the pull tab system is, it's sometimes people pull 2 tabs, 3 tabs, 4 tabs. They may pull for themselves. They may pull erroneously, so it becomes a little confusing at times. And what ends up happening is, we're calling numbers there. When there's a queuing system, it's automatic. You type in your name,
And it's
we know
faster.
who's there,
You're
and
saying
it should
it's
be. It should
faster.
help to.
Okay,
It
well,
should
I'd
help
like
the
to know if
process.
that's faster or
at least
not.
in monitoring, so that we can make sure that we keep to a certain level
All
of.
right. Okay. The other question I have is, you were saying the GRT processing is behind. We talked a little bit about whether, requiring online filing of GRTs would help. And of course, it would help DRT. But then you said that the business licensing people, or business licensing would need 6 more people. Is that for to process GRTs? Because that's business license section.
Well, I'm sorry. I meant BPT.
Oh,
I meant
okay.
BPT,
Oh, all right then, sorry.
not business license. So it's
Okay,
the
then
business
that's-
privilege tax.
All right, but there's nothing to prevent us from requiring online filing of GRT forms, and then they can still have the option to pay however they like, because that's right now an option, right? We can voluntarily file online and either walk in and pay or send it in.
Right, that's correct. But, then it becomes kind of a more 2-step process than a
Right.
single process. So again, it becomes
Right, but the goal here is to get it convenient for you, to save the need to hire more staff, right? Cost cutting for the government, and if we can we were supposed to, I want to follow up, but I'm afraid I'm going to get the same answer on, they were talking before about this. I think they had even almost mandated, I can't remember it, but I thought they did, that they said that Reventax was working on getting kiosks for people who were coming in to file GRTs to do it online right there.
As I understand it, there was a little area that was set up, and
It was already?
I believe there was some equipment that was procured, but I'm not sure why those were never, actually implemented. But yeah, we did have a little section that was set up in, I think behind the driver's license section that was meant for that. But why we never moved forward, I'm not sure.
All right, well, if you could really just give us a very firm answer again as to if we mandated online filing of the forms, that's to help you to monitor BPT, right? just the monitoring, help your staff. And then we keep the process, optional, whether we pay online with a fee or they walk in and pay. Or in the interim, while you figure out, and I think you need a cost analysis of your other idea of, flipping it, where the government's going to pay the credit card fees if you pay online, if we get the payment immediately, versus you're going to pay, the customer, are going to pay the credit card fees if you flip it. And that was your idea. And I'm saying just do a cost analysis on it, because we did that maybe, 10 years ago when the government used to pay all the credit card fees. Then they stopped, even for the walk-ins, right?
Right.
And now all customers pay all their credit card fees.
Right. I mean, and I believe, of course, because there's a significant amount of fees that's paid,
Correct.
For the merchant services fees.
Right.
So I can understand the desire or motivation to move toward having a convenience fee. So yes, that's just one idea. But to go back to your question on will requiring online filing assist us? Absolutely. But I believe that if we're going to, I think you talked about strategy earlier, and I believe that if we're going to be implementing such thing, we need to make sure that we have good strategy, because we need to, again, address the issue of payments. We need to address the issue of some people who do not have access to a computer, or they don't have access to, they are not tech savvy, and how
That's
can we
right. And
perhaps provide some assistance for that?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I thought. There were employees at Department of Revenue and Taxation that had actually worked on that, because, like you said, all the way to the point where the kiosks were procured and put in place, right? And that they
Right.
were, I think there are people there who know about this. I mean, that how far they've gotten, what was the hang up, and if that's just not feasible, did they determine it to be not feasible anymore?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on that, Senator. Yes, the kiosk was set up, and it wasn't just for GRT, but it was to avail taxpayers or our customers of all the online services. Again, it takes a lot of promotion for that. Most people, when they come to Rev and Tax, and they're coming there, they'd rather walk up to the counter than go to a kiosk. So that was just to augment, the added value of online filing or online services. But really, what it boils down to, I think the question you're asking is, if you mandate the filing of GRT, would that help us significantly? Absolutely. But I think the challenge over many, I think just different legislatures is, you don't get the full support, because then people come back and say, well, should there be a threshold? Should we exempt some people? But it is. It will improve our operations. It can probably help cut back in staffing costs. But the challenge right now is the gap that we have to catch up with what's our backlog, and then going forward with online filing. And that probably would require additional funding, because again, it's going to require awarding that to maybe a new or supplementing an existing contract, and making it mandatory. And then every time there's a change to the GRT laws, we have to go in and make those amendments. So yes, it would help.
I'm sorry, tell me again, what costs increase if we mandate online filing?
Well, we want to make sure that if we go and look at even right now it's available, it's not a real significant number of taxpayers that file online, right? And again, if they do, they rather come in and make the payment because of the service fee.
Right.
I don't have the stats with me, but when we want to deploy something like that, we want to make sure that the confidence level is
No, I
there with our
understand that, but you said there were
safeguards.
costs. You said something about a BPU?
Programming costs,
Programming?
yes.
You couldn't use your existing programming?
We don't even have a programmer, it's OTEC who supports us.
Well, isn't it, it's just,
Well,
you're already doing it.
Yes, we're already doing it,
I
that's
guess
correct.
so what costs increase?
With every change, they charge us.
So what we're saying is, with regards to the programming, because anytime that a form changes, we would have to, change the program so that it can accept that. That's one of the things that we need to.
This would require no form change, because it's just saying the forms you're filing now, you're going to file it online, right?
Right, but any time, like for example, with the change or the enhanced Dave Santos Act, with
That's
so
totally a
those types
different
of
question.
yeah. Well, but those
Have you made those changes already?
Well, we're working on
For
changing the
2020?
forms because, yes, January 2020. But anytime, like any change in an exemption would happen, because those have to be able to be reflected in the form when you're filing
But
online.
aren't they? Aren't the forms online up to date?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so there would be no need for any form change
If
if
the
we
law-
mandated that they file online today.
Right now,
right?
that's correct.
Okay, so that's why I'm asking, what costs are you saying would increase? It's supposed to cut costs.
Right.
correct.
Again, I think what we were referring to earlier is just really any programming changes that would
Yeah,
need.
but those are all different bills, and I
Yeah.
didn't even hear that testimony when we were talking about that other bill, that it would cost maybe to change the forms, that being a cost associated. I didn't see that in the fiscal note. But I'm just saying, but to assist Revenue Tax in processing BPTs or GRTs so we don't get another audit that shows that we are behind by
14 months.
14 months, yes, that type of thing.
Yeah, so again, we want to reiterate that, yes, it would be absolutely helpful to have that mandated. However, again, we just need to make sure that, that we have discussions on exactly how that would impact operations and other things. So once some such thing is implemented, we've really thought it well out. But absolutely, we agree that, yes, mandating online filing would be absolutely helpful to us and will help us in terms of, one, making sure that we don't continue to have a backlog. Also help us, I guess, in terms of, our staffing needs. So we may not need as many additional staff. But again, those are things that I think it would be great if we sat down and discussed exactly how to implement. But yes, it would be helpful, Senator.
All right. I don't mind discussing. It's just that in the 2 years that I've been a senator, I feel like those discussions have occurred over and over, and I want to get to the point of implementation, or at least a very concrete line that this is why we cannot implement. That's where I want to be at. That's all. Thank you.
We thank you and we agree with you and we appreciate your comments.
Just another question about the driver's exams. Is there a move to bring that back into revenue and taxation as part of a revenue source for revenue and taxation?
Actually, in terms of actual, discussions, when we've discussed kind of our strategy, that hasn't been one of the items that we've actively been discussing, is to move that back into our agency, no.
Right. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next item, which is insurance license updates.
Okay, so if we can go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so with regards to renewal of licenses, I know there have been some questions regarding the renewal of licenses, in particular for the insurance industry. And so what we did was we sat with our supervisor to discuss this issue. With regards to the renewals, 22 GCA section 15105 is, I guess, is the section of the law that deals with the insurance license renewals and with the deadline and the renewal date. As we understand it, the original deadline, which was July 1, was not correct, and it should have always been June 1, but for some reason, perhaps it was interpreted as July 1. So a notice or a letter was developed, or a letter was sent out either late December or early January, because it was signed by the former, I guess, insurance commissioner before it went out, but advising our carriers, insurance, those people in the insurance industry who were licensed of the deadline. And so that's the issue with the insurance licenses. We're currently working to renew those licenses because, again, the expiration date for those licenses, I believe that's July 1. And so we're trying to get all of those applications that we've processed since we began this month out so we can get people's actual licenses out to them. In terms of continuing education requirements, this is an area where we believe there is a gap, and where we believe, well, first of all, in any area where there's professionals that are being licensed, and we have overview of such licenses, we believe that we have a responsibility to protect the public. And something that our supervisor in the insurance and banking area has shared with us is, that really the rules and regs regarding the continuing education requirements are really significantly deficient in terms of what it requires of for the professional licenses to be renewed. And so, we did try to, I guess in the interest of trying to protect the public, we were working to try to, I guess, simultaneously try to get the CE requirements up, while I guess also I think in prior administrations trying to work to get the CE rules and regs or law amended. And what we've decided, I guess kind of what's fallen out of our discussions is that, perhaps what we need to do is just go ahead and go through the AAA process to address that issue, because, rather than trying to go through legislation, I think it just has to do with adjusting the rules and regs for the CE requirements. But that's, I know, been something that I guess Senator Perez, your office has received calls for, and that also we've received some comments about, and we want to make sure that we address.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Okay, so moving on to the Trump Tax Cuts Act.
Okay, so if we'll refer to the next slide from our presentation. With regards to Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs, or the impact of the Tax Cuts Jobs Act of 2017, we're still at a point where, and I know even when we had the Special Economic Service, we had mentioned it's really difficult to tell what the impact would be. And, so, I mean, at this time, we're still working to process income tax returns. We have a population of about maybe like 60,000 individual income tax returns that get filed, and we're really just trying to touch maybe the first, like 30%, 20. We're in the 20% range in terms of processing and even receiving those. We expect that after the October 15th deadline, that we'll, be able to better assess really the true impact, because, there were, some significant changes that happened when Tax Cuts Jobs was enacted. So at this time, we don't have that, but we did indicate some of the highlights. Of course, there were the lowered tax rates for the various tax brackets. There was a suspension of the personal exemption, so you no longer had that, and the increase in the standard deduction, and the increase in the child tax credit, which is a refundable credit, and then there's also the $500 credit for other dependents. But one thing that we thought was important to share as well is, with regards to even the, I guess, refunds or whether people had a liability, the Circular E, the tax tables, which set forth the amount to withhold, based on your status or your withholding status, those were adjusted in 2018, right? So, that also has an impact on, whether or not your refund will increase or decrease, or what your ultimate tax liability ends up being. And again, those were implemented beginning January 2018. So, although Tax Cuts Jobs, we don't file our tax returns until now, some of the impact of the withholding was already seen, because of the change in the withholding tax tables.
So based on the withholding amount thus far, is there an indication as to how it's going to impact us as far as when it comes October 15th? Does it show as far as compared to last year's withholding? Is there a change?
Well, like we mentioned, we're really still processing, and we're actually still processing the February returns, and we're in June. So we're trying to, I guess, get up to speed on that. We just started in this last month doing overtime and pulling from our other groups so that we can make sure that we do the processing. But at this time, I guess our general consensus in our team is that the data isn't really sufficient to give us some kind of an indication on what the impact is. But within the next 3 to 4 months, especially after the October 15th deadline, which was the extension date for the individuals and corporate, that's at the time that we'll be able to really see at least what the impact is, or at least at the time that we hit perhaps the 50% mark on terms of processing. I think that, or in terms of the population that we receive, we believe at that time that we'll have a better indication of really what the impact is going to be, but we're not yet there.
So compared to other municipalities, what is the impact? Have you noticed any impact in other areas?
And so, we discussed that as well internally because, so each jurisdiction may have its own unique tax structure. So it's difficult to compare ourselves with like California or some other jurisdictions. They may have a different tax structure. They may have a different type of a population base in terms of how salaries and wages and things like that. So it's kind of difficult to tell at this time, again, or even to compare ourselves with other jurisdictions, because there may be certain things that are unique to our population that, may cause us to not exactly be in line with what, the other jurisdictions may be seeing.
Thank you. Senator? Okay. So we're going to move on to the next item, which is the military buildup associated revenues. I know you talked a little bit about that earlier on about base revenue collections.
Right, and so we do have a slide. Thank you. So in the military buildup, again, we just mentioned that for FY 2017, we received about $34 million that were associated with those military contracts, and we do, again, just want to reiterate that we utilize usaspending.gov, and we coordinate with NAVFAC to get the data on those contractors as well. But we'll have to get back to you on the updated data for FY17, and then I guess also updated, whatever data we have again for this fiscal year.
The potential sources of revenue include also the hotel occupancy tax. So as far as military personnel staying in hotels, and is there any way to segregate that data from tourists from Korea?
That from our side, perhaps not. I'm not sure, maybe from the visitor industry or the hotels themselves. I don't know how they may track their or their guests, and how they might stratify the classification of their guests. But the returns that we receive for HOT it doesn't distinguish between the type of guest.
Any questions?
I'm remembering now, we had some discussions here in hearings, but then when we went on the floor, there were assertions made that we are under collecting on this, from contractors or subcontractors or for these build-up projects and I think that was even made by, one of our community accountants, big tax firms. So I guess I would like to know from you whether you are very satisfied with the collections, that you feel like we are collecting as much as we possibly can on this, and that there's no loss here.
With regards to any, I guess...
On the build-up, it says build-up associated revenues.
Right. So with regards to the build-up associated revenues, or with regards to any revenues that we, do our best to bring in, I mean, I'm fully confident in our team. I know that we do have, certain shortcomings in terms of, I guess, our resources and other things, but in terms of working to collect and monitor these, I did talk with our supervisor in the collections branch. She assured me that our team is continuing to that we do have two revenue officers who are dedicated to this initiative, and so I'm confident that we're monitoring and that we're working to collect and make sure that they're in compliance.
All right. Well, I'm happy to hear that, and I'm hoping that's the case. I remember a senator made that assertion, and I remember that accountant made that assertion, and so I don't know why, but I want to know from you. I mean, I'm just going to put it back on you that that's what they're asserting, that we are under monitoring this, and that there are other ways to make sure, such as how California does it, which I don't know how they do it, but they say, somebody suggested to me to look at California and how they do that. That's what we should be doing, and I'm not sure what the gaps are. So if you're satisfied, I guess I'm going to take that as the answer for now, but if you don't mind, just look at it again.
Absolutely, and
So
we
we're
don't have
sure-
any issue, going back and looking at any of the work that we do. In fact, we're constantly working to make sure that we're improving in all areas that we're working. So, thank you for sharing that comment, and we'll take that under advisement
Thank
as
you very
well.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the last item. Well, actually, there's another question I have regarding tax refunds, but the last item on the agenda is the Technical Research and Appeals Bureau.
Okay, and we have actually our last slide, or our second to the last slide, is with regards to, or provides the purpose of the Technical Research and Appeals Branch. So we did talk a little bit about it earlier, but our Technical Research Branch, the purpose is to resolve tax disputes through informal and administrative processes, to help resolve tax controversies without litigation. We review cases after other civil findings. We prepare revenue rulings. We do research and interpretations of tax laws and other DRT matters. We prepare and conduct tax preparer exams, enhance voluntary compliance, and we help to promote public confidence in our tax system. With regards to TRAB, so this is the purpose. Now, something that even as we were talking with our technical research administrator, we were talking a little bit earlier this week on terms of our team and TRAB. Again, we recognize in all areas we're really short-staffed. She's been a real advocate for trying to make sure that we get some additional staff in that area. In just the last month, we were able to transfer or detail someone over there so that we can work to make sure, because we have a very small staff there. We have a staff of 2, and we actually had one person that was out for an extended period of time. So for a while, we had a staff of 1, and so, we've allocated some resources internally, without incurring, a whole lot of additional costs, because we've basically detailed so that we can work to address, and get our numbers up in the TRAB.
Have you assessed the percentage of what we've collected as far as what comes in initially assessed, and what we're able to garner from these cases? Is there a percentage of what we were able to collect?
No, and I don't have that number for you, Senator, right now.
Yeah, I appreciate it if you can research that and provide that information at a later time. Any questions?
Can I just ask, who is this? Is not a division, it's a bureau. Who is this person or the 2 staff?
So we have with us Ms. Jennifer Antalan. She's right here.
Hello.
And then we have also recently detailed Mr. Jerome Uggan from he was originally in our criminal investigation and then our examination branches, and now he's over there working with a technical research group. And it's not easy to be in the technical research group, because by the time cases come over there, they've actually already gone through exam, or it could have even come from collections. So there's been some level of scrutiny on the case, right? So it's a little bit challenging. So we had to make sure that, and Ms. Antalan was a great advocate in making sure that whoever was transferred there was somebody that she felt was fully competent and knew, was able to catch on and knew the industry well. So she was great at that, but we're expecting to see, some additional things come out of TRAP, because we are again trying to work to get those resources there.
Thank you, and thank you for your work, all of you here from Reverend Tax. Thank you very much for your work, for your answering these questions very openly and transparently. I very much appreciate that. That, I think, is the key. And so I'm hoping that we can get the updates that we've asked for in the areas, at least that I've asked for, if you could send them to the chair, and what the next steps also, in addition to those, what the next steps would be in setting up that voluntary collection agreement with Airbnb. This information, I mean, it's just for me, at least. I'm not sure the other senators, but for me, I just want to be very confident when we rely on these numbers and we say, we're going to run the government with these numbers, and we are relying on revenue and taxation for so much of those predictions, right? That they are going to do what they said they were going to do, or that they will or will not be able to implement the tobacco stamp, for example, if we know that very clearly, we're not going to bank on it. And that's all I want to be able to do is make a very clear plan for the next year for the people of Guam. And you are critical to that, all of you. So thank you again for all your work.
Yeah, I just forgot to put on the agenda where are we at as far as tax refunds. And I'm just looking in the past where we paid out interest up to $1.7 million just in 2018. So since I didn't ask that ahead of time, I appreciate if you can provide an update, unless you have some information on the tax refunds and interest that's paid out thus far.
Yeah, we'll have to get back to you on that exact amount of interest that's paid out, Senator. We don't have that information right now with us.
Okay, great.
But I wanted to say thank you to Senator, our oversight, Senator Perez, and also you, Senator Schlahe, and all the senators that may have contributed to ask questions. And I thank you also for mentioning thank you to the hard work of our team. I will share with you that in the short time that I've been there, I've been very grateful for their hard work and for all of the work that they've put in. And I think that, we have a lot of very credible, smart, hardworking people in our team, people who, pay things out of their own pocket, people who last night were working until like almost 11 o'clock at night to try to make sure that we have a PowerPoint presentation for today, people who work through lunches. And I'm very grateful because, frankly, at the end of the day, I'm really just, kind of there helping to try to manage and move things around and give recommendations to them. But at the end of the day, it's really our team here that they're out pounding the pavement, getting collections, getting, people who are to issue notice of violations, getting people to come in compliance, working with our taxpayers every day. And without them, honestly, they are so key to everything that we do, and they're so key to the government. I remind them of that every time I talk to them. I'm very proud and I'm very grateful to, Governor and Lieutenant Governor for allowing me and our deputy to be able to work there. And I look forward to continuing to try to work to make sure that we will, I can definitely say that we'll always do the best that we can to make sure that we're doing the right things and that we're going to be working very hard with you and with our administration to make sure that we achieve the goals that we have. So, but thank you for this opportunity, Senator Perez, and for this morning.
Yes, I would like to thank everybody here that put all their efforts in putting this report together. I know it was very stressful. And I also want to thank you for all the efforts that you're doing as far as collections and all these, and basically fulfilling the mission of Department of Revenue and Taxation. I understand, I realize that this is a deeply neglected, I feel that in my opinion, it's been neglected for so long, and it's time that we put more resources. And being that the budget is coming up, I do want to recommend that you supplement the budget to include the needs that Department of Revenue and Taxation requires to complete their mandates and complete the mission that's before you guys, because all our government depends upon it, and to make sure that our economy is doing well too as well. So thank you for all your efforts and for being here. And Tzuzus Masi. So this concludes the informational hearing on the Committee on Environment, Revenue, and Taxation and Procurement. The time is now 11:20.